The water was already ankle-deep when Elena Dawson realized her ceiling wasn't supposed to look like a waterfall. She stood frozen in her doorway, keys still dangling from her fingers, watching as water cascaded from the light fixture in her living room. The apartment above hers must have had a catastrophic pipe burst, because this wasn't a slow leak. This was a deluge. Her couch was soaked, her bookshelf dripping, and the hardwood floors she'd admired so much when signing the lease were now completely submerged. "No, no, no," Elena muttered, dropping her purse and splashing through the water toward her bedroom. Her laptop was in there, her clothes, everything she owned. She yanked open the bedroom door and her heart sank further. Water was pouring through the ceiling here too, right onto her bed. The white comforter was soaked through, and she could see water pooling on her nightstand where her phone charger sat sparking. She unplugged it quickly, her hands shaking. This was a nightmare. She'd only lived here for 3 months. 3 months in this beautiful Brooklyn apartment that had cost her nearly every penny of her savings to move into. She worked as a museum curator at a small gallery in Manhattan, and while the job was her dream, the pay was modest at best. She couldn't afford to replace everything. Elena grabbed what she could, stuffing dry clothes into a duffel bag, rescuing her laptop from her desk. The water was rising faster now, and she heard a groaning sound from above that made her blood run cold. She needed to get out. She needed to call someone. The building super, her landlord, anyone. But when she dialed the super's number, it rang and rang with no answer. The landlord went straight to voicemail. Elena stood in her doorway, soaking wet duffel bag over her shoulder, and felt tears prick her eyes. It was nearly 9 at night on a Sunday. Where was she supposed to go? Her parents lived in Ohio. Her best friend Sarah was out of town at a conference. Her other friends lived in tiny studios that barely fit one person, let alone 2. Elena looked down the hallway of her floor, wondering if any of her neighbors were home. She'd only met a few of them in passing. There was the elderly woman in 4C who always smiled but didn't speak much English. The young couple in 4A who seemed nice but were never home. And then there was 4D. She'd never actually met whoever lived in 4D, but she knew someone was there. She'd hear footsteps sometimes, always heavy and purposeful. Once, she'd seen a tall figure disappearing into the apartment as she was coming home from work, but he'd closed the door before she could say hello. Sarah had joked that maybe Elena had a mysterious hermit neighbor, and Elena had laughed it off. Now, standing in the hallway with water starting to seep out of her apartment, the mysterious neighbor seemed like her only option. Elena walked to 4D and knocked, her heart pounding. "Please be home," she thought. "Please, please be home." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard those same heavy footsteps approaching. The door swung open, and Elena found herself staring up at possibly the most intimidating man she'd ever seen. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all day. His jaw was sharp, covered with dark stubble, and his eyes were a piercing gray that seemed to look straight through her. He wore a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms and dark slacks. He looked like he'd just come from a business meeting, except it was Sunday night and he looked exhausted. "What?" His voice was deep and decidedly unfriendly. Elena swallowed. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm Elena. I live in 4B and my apartment is flooding. The whole place is underwater and I can't reach the super or my landlord, and I just need somewhere to stay for a little while until I can figure out what to do." The man stared at her, his expression completely unreadable. His eyes flicked to the duffel bag on her shoulder, then to her wet shoes, then back to her face. "There are hotels," he said flatly. Elena felt her cheeks flush. "I know, But I just spent everything on this month's rent and I don't get paid until Friday, and I just thought maybe, since we're neighbors, we're not neighbors. We just live on the same floor." The words were harsh, and Elena felt the tears threatening again. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of this rude stranger. "Fine. Sorry I bothered you." She turned away, trying to figure out her next move. Maybe she could sleep in the museum's break room. It wouldn't be comfortable, but at least it would be dry. She'd taken maybe 3 steps when she heard him sigh behind her. "Wait." Elena turned back. The man was still standing in his doorway, and he looked deeply unhappy about what he was about to say. "You can stay here. Tonight only. Tomorrow you figure something else out." Relief flooded through her so intensely she almost did cry. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I won't be any trouble. I'll just sleep on the couch or whatever and I'll be out of your way." He'd already turned and walked back into his apartment, leaving the door open behind him. Elena took that as an invitation and followed him inside. If her apartment was cozy and personal, filled with books and plants and colorful throw pillows, his was the complete opposite. The layout was identical to hers, but that's where the similarities ended. Everything was sleek and modern and expensive looking. A massive black leather couch faced a television that was definitely worth more than everything Elena owned. The kitchen had gleaming stainless steel appliances that looked like they'd never been used. There were no personal touches, no photos, nothing that indicated an actual human lived here. "Guest room is down the hall," the man said, not looking at her. He was standing by the kitchen counter, pouring himself what looked like whiskey. "Bathroom is next to it. Don't touch anything else." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "I really appreciate this. I'm Elena, by the way, Elena Dawson." He took a long drink. "I know you said that already, right? And you are." He seemed to debate whether to answer. Kellan Driscoll. "Nice to meet you, Kellan." Even under these circumstances, Kellan just grunted and walked past her toward what she assumed was his bedroom. "I have work early. Keep it down." And then he was gone, his bedroom door closing with a firm click. Elena stood alone in the vast, cold apartment and wondered what she'd just gotten herself into. The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment. A queen bed with white sheets, a dresser, a closet. Nothing on the walls, no lamp on the nightstand, nothing. It felt like a hotel room, sterile and temporary. But it was dry and it had a bed, and right now that was all Elena needed. She changed into dry clothes, brushed her teeth in the pristine bathroom, and climbed into bed. Through the wall, she could hear Kellan moving around in his room. She wondered what his story was, why he lived like this, why he was so grumpy. Then again, she'd just shown up at his door begging for help. Maybe he had a right to be annoyed. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to think about her ruined apartment, her soaked belongings, the fact that she was sleeping in a stranger's guest room. Tomorrow she'd figure it out. Tomorrow everything would be better. She woke to the smell of coffee and sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she was disoriented, then everything came rushing back. The flood. Kellan. The guest room. Elena checked her phone. It was 7 in the morning, and she had 3 missed calls from the building super. She called back immediately. "Miss Dawson, I'm so sorry," the super said, sounding harried. "The pipe burst in 5B was catastrophic. We've got a crew working on it now, but your apartment and several others sustained serious damage. You're going to need to find somewhere else to stay for at least a week, maybe longer." Elena's stomach dropped. "A week, at least. We need to dry everything out, assess the damage, replace the flooring. The landlord will work with you on rent, of course, but the apartment isn't livable right now." After she hung up, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. A week. Where was she supposed to stay for a week? She pulled up her banking app and checked her balance. Even if she found the cheapest hotel in Brooklyn, she couldn't afford a week. She'd have to call her parents, ask them for money, which she hated doing. She was 26 years old. She was supposed to have her life together. There was a knock on the bedroom door, sharp and impatient. "I'm up," Elena called, standing quickly. She opened the door to find Kellan standing there, dressed in a sharp navy suit that probably cost more than her car. He was holding a cup of coffee. "You need to leave," he said without preamble. "I have a meeting in an hour." "Right, of course." Elena took the coffee he was holding out, surprised by the gesture. "I just talked to the super. My apartment is going to be uninhabitable for at least a week." Kellan's jaw tightened. "That's not my problem. I know that. I'm just telling you." Elena took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect, strong and black, exactly how she liked it. "Thank you for letting me stay last night, and for the coffee." He just stared at her with those intense gray eyes. "You have 30 minutes. Then he was gone again, heading toward the door. Elena heard it close behind him, and she let out a long breath. She packed up her things quickly, made the bed, and made sure the guest room looked exactly like she'd never been there. She was just heading for the door when her phone rang. It was her boss, Margaret. "Elena, darling, I just heard about your apartment from Sarah. She called me this morning. Are you all right?" Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. Of course Sarah would have called Margaret. That's what best friends did. "I'm okay. The apartment is flooded, but I'm fine." "Where are you staying?" "I'm figuring that out now." "Absolutely not. You're staying with me." Elena closed her eyes, grateful. "Margaret, I can't impose like that." "Nonsense. I have that big old brownstone all to myself since Richard passed. You'd be doing me a favor. Come by the museum this morning and we'll get you settled tonight." They talked for a few more minutes, and by the time Elena hung up, she felt like she could breathe again. She'd stay with Margaret for a few days until she figured something else out. It would be fine. She left Kellan's apartment, making sure to lock the door behind her, and headed to her own place to survey the damage in daylight. It was worse than she'd thought. The floors were completely ruined, warped and discolored. Her couch smelled like mildew already. Most of her books were destroyed. She spent the morning salvaging what she could, packing boxes with the help of the building crew. They assured her the landlord would compensate her for the damages, but Elena had been a renter long enough to know that would take weeks, maybe months. By the time she made it to the museum, she was exhausted and filthy. Margaret took one look at her and sent her home immediately. "Take the day," her boss said kindly. "Get yourself settled. We'll see you tomorrow." Margaret's brownstone in Park Slope was beautiful, filled with art and antiques and warmth. It was exactly the kind of home Elena hoped to have someday, if she ever made enough money. Margaret showed her to a guest room on the 3rd floor, this one actually decorated with oil paintings and a cozy reading chair by the window. "Make yourself at home, dear," Margaret said. "I'm usually at the museum until 7, so you'll have the place to yourself during the day. There's food in the kitchen, and please use whatever you need." That night, Elena took a long bath, ate leftover pasta from Margaret's fridge, and tried to feel grateful. She had a place to stay. She had her job. She had people who cared about her. Everything else was just things. But as she lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about Kellan. His gruff demeanor, his cold apartment, the way he'd looked at her like she was an inconvenience. And yet he'd let her stay. He'd given her coffee. He'd said he had a meeting in an hour, which on a Monday morning suggested he had an important job. She wondered what he did, why he lived the way he did. Then she shook her head and told herself it didn't matter. She'd never see him again. She was wrong. 3 days later, Elena was running late for work, hurrying down the street from the subway with her coat unbuttoned and her scarf trailing behind her. She'd overslept after staying up too late helping Margaret catalog a new collection. She turned the corner toward the museum and ran straight into a solid wall of a person. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, stumbling backward. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. She looked up into familiar gray eyes. "You," Kellan said, and he sounded just as surprised as she felt. "Kellan." "Hi." Elena stepped back, smoothing her coat. "Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going." He was wearing another expensive suit, this one charcoal gray, and he looked even more tired than he had on Sunday. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was tight with what looked like stress. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Elena gestured to the building behind her. "I work here at the Hudson Gallery." Kellan's eyes narrowed slightly. "The museum?" "Yes, I'm a curator." She glanced at her watch. "And I'm late. Sorry again for running into you." She started to move past him, but he caught her arm gently. "Wait, how's your apartment?" The question surprised her. She'd assumed he didn't care at all. Still flooded. "I'm staying with my boss for now." He nodded, his hand dropping from her arm. "Good." They stood there for an awkward moment, and Elena realized he wasn't moving to leave. "Do you work around here?" Meeting nearby. He seemed to be debating something internally, then added, "I'm glad you found somewhere to stay." It wasn't much, but coming from him it felt significant. Elena found herself smiling. "Thanks again for that night. I know I was a bother." "You weren't." He stopped, jaw clenching. "It was fine." "Well, I should go. My boss is understanding, but not that understanding." Elena started backing toward the museum entrance. "It was good to see you, Kellan." "Elena." He said her name like he was testing it out. "Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe," she agreed, then turned and hurried into the museum. She thought about him on and off all day. The way he'd looked at her, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. The fact that he'd asked about her apartment, that he'd seemed genuinely concerned. Maybe there was more to the grumpy billionaire than his cold exterior suggested. Wait. Billionaire? Elena paused in the middle of cataloging a new impressionist piece. Where had that thought come from? She didn't know anything about Kellan's finances. Sure, his apartment was nice, and his suits were expensive, but that didn't make him a billionaire. Lots of people in New York dressed well and lived beyond their means, but something nagged at her. The way he carried himself, the confidence that came from never having to worry about money. The pristine apartment that looked barely lived in, like maybe it was just one of several properties. The fact that he'd had a meeting on a Monday morning that required a suit that probably cost $5,000, she shook her head. It didn't matter. She'd probably never see him again anyway, except she did see him again. The next day, in fact. Elena was walking back from her lunch break, a sandwich in hand, when she spotted him coming out of a building 2 blocks from the museum. He was with several men in suits, all of them looking serious. One of them said something and Kellan nodded, his expression hard and businesslike. He looked every inch the powerful executive. Then he glanced up and saw her. For a second, his expression didn't change. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Elena waved, feeling silly but unable to help herself. Kellan said something to the men he was with and walked toward her. "Are you following me?" he asked, and there was the barest hint of amusement in his voice. "You're the one who appeared in my neighborhood," Elena pointed out. "What are you doing around here? I own a building nearby." "Commercial property." He glanced at the sandwich in her hand. "Is that your lunch?" "Yes, I'm heading back to work." "That's not enough food," Elena blinked. "Excuse me, you need to eat more than that." She laughed, surprised by his bluntness. "Are you seriously criticizing my lunch choices?" "I'm observing that you're too thin and a sandwich isn't a proper meal." "Well, some of us can't afford fancy business lunches every day," Elena said, then immediately regretted it. That was too personal, too revealing of her financial situation. Sorry, that was. When do you get off work? The question threw her. What? What time do you finish work today? 6. Why? Have dinner with me. Elena stared at him. Kellan looked back, his expression neutral, like he asked women to dinner every day. Maybe he did. He was gorgeous in a stern, intimidating way, and he clearly had money. He probably had women falling all over him. I don't think that's a good idea, Elena said carefully. Why not? Because you're clearly used to a certain lifestyle and I'm not, and this feels like it would be weird, and also you were really rude to me when we met. Kellan's jaw tightened. I apologized for that. No, you didn't. I'm apologizing now. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. I'll text you the address. I haven't said yes yet. Are you saying no? Elena bit her lip. She should say no. This man was intense and grumpy and probably had a whole complicated life she didn't want to get involved in. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability he was trying to hide, that made her hesitate. One dinner, she said finally. Just as a thank you for letting me stay that night. It's not a thank you. I want to have dinner with you. The directness of the statement made Elena's cheeks warm. Okay, one dinner. She gave him her number, and he immediately sent her a text with an address. Elena glanced at it and felt her stomach drop. It was a restaurant she'd read about in magazines, the kind of place that had a 6-month waiting list and charged $200 per person. Kellan, I can't afford my invitation, my payment. 6:30. Don't be late. Then he turned and walked back to the men he'd been with, leaving Elena standing on the sidewalk wondering what just happened. That evening, Elena stood in front of Margaret's guest room mirror and tried not to panic. She had exactly one dress that could possibly be appropriate for a restaurant like the one Kellan had chosen. A simple black sheath dress she'd bought for gallery openings. She paired it with her nicest shoes, a pair of black heels that were only slightly scuffed, and the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. It would have to do. She arrived at the restaurant at 6:25, too nervous to be fashionably late. The host took one look at her and seemed to know exactly who she was there to see. Miss Dawson, Mr. Driscoll is waiting for you, right this way. They wound through the elegant dining room to a private corner table, and Elena's breath caught when she saw Kellan. He'd changed into a black suit with no tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and he looked devastating. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that surprised her. You look beautiful, he said, and the compliment sounded like it had been dragged out of him against his will. Thank you, you look nice too. Elena sat down, trying to calm her racing heart. This place is incredible. You've never been here on a museum curator's salary? Definitely not. Something flickered in Kellan's eyes. What made you want to work in museums? It was a genuine question, and Elena found herself relaxing slightly as she answered. I've always loved art. The way a painting can make you feel something, transport you somewhere else. I wanted to help preserve that, share it with people who might not otherwise have access to it. That's admirable. Kellan poured her a glass of wine from a bottle that had been waiting. Most people I know are motivated by money. What motivates you? He was quiet for a long moment. Control. The answer was so honest it startled her. Control. I grew up without it. Now I have it, and I don't plan to give it up. Elena wanted to ask what he meant, but the waiter appeared to take their order. Kellan ordered for both of them, somehow knowing exactly what she'd like without asking. It should have been presumptuous, but somehow it wasn't. So what do you do? Elena asked when they were alone again. I'm realizing I know almost nothing about you except that you're my neighbor and you have a nice apartment. Kellan took a drink of his wine. I run a real estate investment company, Driscoll Properties. Elena's eyes widened. She'd heard of Driscoll Properties. Everyone in New York had heard of Driscoll Properties. They owned half the commercial buildings in Manhattan and had recently expanded into residential development. The company was worth billions. "You're that Driscoll," she said faintly. "Does it matter?" "I mean, it's a little intimidating." "Why?" He leaned forward slightly. "I'm the same person who let you sleep in my guest room. The same person who told me there were hotels and we weren't neighbors," Elena pointed out. Kellan had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was having a bad day." "What happened?" "I just closed a deal I'd been working on for 6 months. It should have felt like a victory, but instead I was sitting in my apartment alone, wondering what the point of any of it was." He met her eyes. "Then you knocked on my door, soaking wet and desperate, and I was an asshole. You let me stay." "Not graciously." Elena smiled. "No, not graciously, but you did let me stay, and you gave me coffee, and you asked how my apartment was today. That counts for something." Their food arrived, and it was the best meal Elena had ever had. They talked more easily after that, the conversation flowing naturally. Kellan told her about growing up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker who'd lost his job when Kellan was 12. How his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, how Kellan had put himself through college with scholarships and student loans, how he'd built his company from nothing. "I bought my mother a house in Florida last year," he said. "She still works, even though I've begged her to retire. Says she doesn't know what she'd do with herself." "She sounds amazing," Elena said softly. "She is. She's the reason I never quit, even when things were impossible." Elena told him about her childhood in Ohio, about parents who'd supported her impractical dreams of working in museums, about her older brother who was a teacher and her younger sister, who was in medical school, about how she'd always felt like the odd one out, the artistic one in a family of practical people. "They worry about me," she admitted. "Think I should get a real job with benefits and a 401k. "Are you happy?" Kellan asked. "Yes. Even when I'm eating sandwiches for lunch and can't afford to fix my apartment." "You shouldn't have to choose between happiness and financial security. Not everyone gets both. You deserve both." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elena felt her pulse quicken as Kellan looked at her, really looked at her, like she was something precious he wanted to understand. "I should get back," Elena said finally, reluctantly. "It's late and I have work tomorrow." Kellan signaled for the check. When it arrived, Elena didn't see the total, but she caught a glimpse of several $100s. She felt guilty and grateful in equal measure. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cold and crisp. Kellan's driver pulled up in a sleek black car. "Let me take you home," Kellan said. "Home is Park Slope right now. That's out of your way." "I don't care." They rode in comfortable silence, the city lights flashing by the window. When they pulled up to Margaret's brownstone, Kellan walked Elena to the door. "Thank you for dinner," Elena said. "It was wonderful." "Can I see you again?" Elena's heart skipped. "Kellan, I know I'm not easy. I know I'm grumpy and intense and I live like a hermit, but I haven't enjoyed talking to someone this much in years." His gray eyes were fierce in the streetlight. "Give me a chance." Elena thought about all the reasons she should say no. The vast difference in their lifestyles, the fact that he was her neighbor and things could get complicated, the reality that she was still figuring out her own life and didn't need a relationship complicating things further. But she thought about the way he'd looked when he talked about his mother, the vulnerability underneath his gruff exterior, the fact that he'd been honest with her about everything. "Okay," she said softly. "One more date." The corner of Kellan's mouth lifted in that almost smile. "I'll call you tomorrow." He waited until she was safely inside before returning to his car, and Elena watched through the window as he drove away. Margaret was waiting in the kitchen with tea and an amused expression. "So, who's the handsome man in the expensive car?" Elena collapsed into a chair and told her everything. The next day, Kellan called during her lunch break. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, and Elena found herself smiling the entire time. He called again that evening and the next day and the day after that. Their conversations became the highlights of Elena's day, moments of warmth in her hectic life. On Friday, he took her to a small Italian restaurant in the village, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. It was nothing like their first date, and somehow that made it even better. "I wanted somewhere we could actually talk," Kellan explained. "Not somewhere I had to impress you." "You don't have to impress me," Elena said. "I want to." They talked for hours, losing track of time. Elena learned that Kellan loved classic movies and read biographies of historical figures, that he ran every morning at 5:30 and had never missed a day in 10 years, that he was terrified of failure and pushed himself relentlessly because of it. "You need to be easier on yourself," Elena told him. "That's not how success works." "Maybe not, but it's how happiness works." Kellan reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd really touched her, and Elena felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. "You make me think maybe happiness is possible," he said quietly. On Saturday, Elena's landlord called to say the apartment would be ready by the following Friday. The floors had been replaced, the ceiling repaired, everything cleaned and dried. Elena should have been thrilled, but instead she felt an odd sense of loss. She'd enjoyed staying with Margaret, but more than that, she'd enjoyed having a reason to talk to Kellan every day, to share updates about the apartment situation. "That's great news," Kellan said when she told him over the phone that evening. He was quiet for a moment. "I'll help you move back in." "You don't have to do that." "I want to. Besides, you'll need someone to carry boxes." "Are you saying I'm not strong enough to carry my own boxes?" Elena teased. "I'm saying you shouldn't have to do it alone." The following Friday, Kellan showed up at her apartment building wearing jeans and a plain black t-shirt. Elena had never seen him in casual clothes before, and she had to actively stop herself from staring. The t-shirt clung to broad shoulders and defined arms, and the jeans fit him perfectly. He looked younger like this, less like a stern businessman and more like just a man. "Ready to work?" he asked, and she caught a hint of amusement in his eyes, like he knew exactly what she'd been thinking. They spent the day unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, making the apartment feel like home again. The landlord had replaced her ruined couch with a new one, and while it wasn't exactly what Elena would have chosen, it was nice enough. Kellan moved furniture without being asked, seemed to know instinctively where things should go. "You're good at this," Elena said, watching him hang curtains. "I've renovated enough properties. You learn what works." By evening, the apartment looked lived in again. Elena ordered pizza and they ate sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty boxes. "Thank you for helping," Elena said. "You didn't have to give up your whole Saturday." "I wanted to." Kellan looked around the apartment. "It's nice, very you." "What does that mean? Warm, creative, welcoming?" His eyes met hers. "Everything my place isn't." "Your place is nice," Elena protested. "My place is a hotel room. This is a home." Elena set down her pizza. "Why do you live like that? Like you're just passing through?" Kellan was quiet for a long time. "Because for a long time, I was just passing through. I moved 17 times before I was 18. We were always chasing work, always 1 month away from eviction. I told myself when I made it, when I had money, I'd have a real home. But then I made it and I realized I didn't know how. A home isn't about expensive furniture or perfect decorating," Elena said gently. "It's about the life you build there, the memories you make." I don't have memories, I have work. Elena reached over and took his hand. Maybe it's time to change that. Kellan looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. Elena, I'm not good at this, at relationships, at being open. I'll probably mess this up. Probably, Elena agreed, smiling. But I'll probably mess it up too. We can mess it up together. He laughed, an actual laugh, and the sound was gorgeous. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like Kellan wasn't sure he was allowed. Elena kissed him back, and the tentative gentleness transformed into something deeper, more urgent. His hand came up to cup her face, and Elena felt herself melting into him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kellan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight," Elena whispered. "Not in the guest room, with me. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They moved to the bedroom, and Kellan was careful with her, reverent almost. He took his time, like he was memorizing every inch of her skin, every sound she made. Elena had been with men before, but never like this. Never with this intensity, this feeling of being completely seen and wanted. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Elena's new bed, and she traced patterns on his chest. "I'm falling for you," Kellan said into the darkness. "I need you to know that. This isn't casual for me." "It's not casual for me either," Elena said. "You scare me a little if I'm being honest. You're so intense and your life is so different from mine. Does it matter, the difference? I don't know yet." Elena tilted her head to look at him, "But I want to find out." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and when Elena woke in the morning to find Kellan still there, still holding her, she felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt a lot like hope. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Kellan would come over after work most evenings, and they'd cook dinner together or order takeout. He'd tell her about difficult negotiations and impossible clients, and she'd tell him about new acquisitions at the museum and her favorite pieces in their collection. On weekends, they'd explore the city together, and Elena would show Kellan the New York she loved, the small galleries and hidden parks, the restaurants that served amazing food without charging a fortune. "I've lived here for 15 years and never seen most of this," Kellan admitted one Saturday as they wandered through a street fair in Williamsburg. "Because you're always working," Elena said. "Not anymore." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not when I could be with you instead." Elena's friends met him and were predictably impressed and concerned in equal measure. "He's gorgeous, but is he treating you right?" Sarah demanded over brunch one Sunday while Kellan was at a work meeting. "Because if he's not, I will key his fancy car." "He treats me like I'm precious," Elena said, smiling. "Better than anyone ever has. And you're not intimidated by the whole billionaire thing." "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "Like when he casually mentions buying a building or when I see how people react to him in public. But then we're alone and he's just Kellan, and none of that matters." Elena met Kellan's mother when she came to visit in November. Patricia Driscoll was small and warm and had the same gray eyes as her son. She hugged Elena like they'd known each other forever. "So you're the one who's made my boy smile," Patricia said. "He's been different since he met you. Lighter." "Your son is an amazing man," Elena said. "He is. He's also stubborn and works too hard and forgets that there's more to life than success." Patricia took Elena's hands. "But I think you're reminding him of that. Thank you." That evening, the three of them had dinner at Kellan's apartment. Elena had helped him decorate over the past few weeks, adding throw pillows and plants and framed photographs. It still wasn't as warm as her place, but it was getting there. It was starting to feel like a home. "I like what you've done with the place," Patricia said approvingly. "It actually looks like someone lives here now." "That's all Elena," Kellan said, looking at her with undisguised affection. "She's been trying to civilize me." It's a work in progress, Elena teased. After Patricia left the next day, Kellan was quiet. They were lying in his bed, Elena curled against his side when he finally spoke. My mother really likes you. I really like her. She's wonderful. She said I should marry you. Elena's breath caught. She did. She said you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and if I let you go, I'm an idiot. Kellan shifted so he could look at her. She's right. Kellan, I know it's soon. I know we've only been together for 2 months. But I've never felt like this about anyone. I didn't know I could feel like this. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you, Elena. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Don't be scared. Kellan kissed her softly. I'm not going anywhere. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. Kellan started keeping clothes at Elena's apartment, and she kept things at his place. They talked about the future, about what they wanted, what scared them. Kellan admitted he'd always wanted kids, but had assumed he'd never have time for a family. Elena confessed she dreamed of eventually opening her own small gallery, but didn't think she'd ever have the capital. What if I helped? Kellan asked one evening as they were cooking dinner in Elena's kitchen. Helped with what, your gallery? What if I invested? Elena set down her spoon. Kellan, no, that's too much. Why, I invest in properties all the time. This would be investing in something I actually care about. Because it changes things. Because then it wouldn't really be mine, it would be yours. Kellan was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see him processing her words. You're right, I'm sorry, I just want to help you achieve your dreams. I know, and I love you for it. But some things I need to do on my own, you know. He pulled her into his arms. I know. But when you're ready, when you've saved enough and you want a partner, I'm here. Not as a billionaire investor, but as someone who believes in you. Deal, Elena said, rising on her toes to kiss him. In December, Elena's parents came to visit. They'd heard about Kellan but hadn't met him yet, and Elena was nervous. Her mother was protective, and her father was skeptical of anyone who had too much money. Just be yourself, Elena told Kellan the morning her parents were due to arrive. They'll love you. What if they don't? Then I'll love you enough for all of us. But her worries were unfounded. Her father, Tom, appreciated Kellan's straightforward manner and work ethic. Her mother, Carol, melted when Kellan complimented her cooking and asked about her garden. By the end of the weekend, they were thoroughly charmed. He's good for you, Carol told Elena privately. I can see how happy you are. I am happy, Mom, happier than I've ever been. Then that's all that matters. On Christmas Eve, Kellan and Elena walked through Central Park, bundled in coats and scarves. It was snowing lightly, and the city looked magical, all lit up and peaceful. I have something for you, Kellan said, stopping by Bow Bridge. We said we weren't doing big presents, Elena protested. This isn't big, it's just important. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Elena's heart started racing. But when he opened it, instead of a ring, there was a key. It's to my apartment, Kellan explained. I want you to move in with me. I know your lease isn't up until March, but I'm asking now because I can't wait anymore. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to come home to you every night. I want to build a real home, the kind I never had with you. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, of course, yes. Kellan kissed her, soft and sweet, as snow fell around them. I love you so much. I love you too. They stayed in the park until they were both freezing, then went back to Kellan's apartment and made hot chocolate and curled up on the couch. Elena fingered the key, marveling at how much her life had changed in just a few months. What are you thinking? Kellan asked. That if my apartment hadn't flooded, none of this would have happened. We might have lived next to each other for years and never really met. I would have found a way to meet you eventually. How do you know? Because from the moment I saw you standing in my doorway, soaking wet and asking for help, I knew you were going to change everything." Kellan pulled her closer. "I just didn't know how much, how completely." Elena moved in with Kellan in January. It was strange at first, blending their lives together. Kellan was neat to the point of obsessive, while Elena was more scattered. He woke up at 5:30 without an alarm while she hit snooze 3 times. But they made it work, compromising and adjusting, learning each other's rhythms. Elena added more warmth to the apartment, more color and life. She filled the bookcases with novels and art books, hung paintings on the walls, bought fresh flowers every week. Kellan started coming home earlier, making time for dinners and movie nights, learning that there was more to life than work. They had their first real fight in February. Elena wanted to help her sister with medical school tuition, but her savings were limited. She mentioned selling some of her grandmother's jewelry, pieces that meant a lot to her but could fetch a decent price. "Don't sell your jewelry," Kellan said. "I'll give you the money." "No, you won't," Elena said firmly. "This is my family, my responsibility. But I can help." "Why won't you let me help?" "Because I need to do this myself. Because I need to know I can take care of the people I love without depending on your money. It's not about depending on me. It's about being a team. A team where one person has billions and the other makes 40,000 a year." "That's not a team, Kellan. That's a charity case." The words came out harsher than she meant, and she saw him flinch. They didn't talk for the rest of the evening, both too proud to apologize. It was Elena who finally broke the silence that night. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did." Kellan was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her. "And maybe you're right. Maybe I can't understand what it's like to worry about money because I haven't worried about it in years." Elena sat next to him. "I don't want you to feel bad about being successful. You earned everything you have. But I need you to understand that my independence matters to me, that being able to take care of myself and my family matters. I do understand that. I just want to make your life easier. You do make my life easier. You make it better. But some things I need to do on my own, and you need to respect that." Kellan was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll try. But if you ever need help, if you ever want help, promise you'll ask. I promise." They made up properly after that, and Elena felt like they'd crossed some important threshold. They'd fought and worked through it, and their relationship was stronger for it. In March, Kellan took Elena to Paris for a long weekend. She'd never been to Europe, and seeing the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, the gorgeous art she'd only seen in books, was overwhelming in the best way. "Thank you for this," Elena said as they stood in front of Monet's water lilies. "This is a dream come true." "You deserve to see the world," Kellan said. "I want to show you everything." On their last night in Paris, Kellan took her to a small restaurant overlooking the Seine. They had wine and perfect food and talked about everything and nothing. As they were finishing dessert, Kellan reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to ask you something." Elena's heart started pounding. "Okay. When I met you, I was living half a life. I was successful by every measure that's supposed to matter, but I was lonely and isolated, and I didn't even realize it. You changed all that. You taught me how to be happy, how to actually live instead of just working." He stood up and came around the table, and Elena's breath caught as he got down on one knee. "Elena Dawson, will you marry me?" He pulled out a ring, a simple platinum band with a perfect round diamond. It was elegant and understated and absolutely beautiful. "Yes," Elena breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Kellan slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Elena felt like her heart might burst from joy. Around them, other diners were clapping and cheering, but she barely noticed. All she could see was Kellan, the man who'd started as a grumpy neighbor and become the love of her life. They were married in September, a year after they'd met. It was a small ceremony in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, just family and close friends. Elena wore a simple lace dress, and Kellan cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. They wrote their own vows, and Elena's voice shook as she promised to love him through everything, to be his home the way he'd become hers. "You saved me," Kellan said in his vows. "I didn't know I needed saving, but you showed up at my door and changed my entire life. I promise to spend every day making you as happy as you've made me. To support your dreams, to respect your independence, to build a life with you that's full of love and laughter, and all the things I never thought I'd have." Their reception was at a restaurant overlooking the East River, and they danced until midnight, surrounded by everyone they loved. Patricia Driscoll gave a speech that had everyone crying, talking about how she'd watched her son work himself to exhaustion for years, and how grateful she was that Elena had taught him to actually live. "To Elena and Kellan," Patricia said, raising her glass. "May you have a lifetime of happiness together." They honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks eating amazing food and seeing incredible art and making love in gorgeous hotel rooms. It was perfect and romantic, and everything Elena had ever dreamed of. When they returned to New York, they settled into married life. Elena continued working at the museum while slowly saving for her own gallery. Kellan made a conscious effort to work less, to be home for dinner most nights, to make their relationship a priority. They talked about having kids, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want them to have everything I didn't," Kellan said. "Stability, security, a home they know will always be there." "I want them to have that too," Elena agreed. "But I also want them to know that things aren't what matter most, that relationships and experiences and love are what make life meaningful." "We'll teach them both," Kellan said. "Balance." Elena got pregnant in December, almost exactly 2 years after Kellan had given her the key to his apartment. They were both thrilled and terrified in equal measure. Kellan read every parenting book he could find and baby-proofed the apartment 6 months early. Elena painted a nursery and picked out furniture, and tried not to worry about all the things that could go wrong. Their daughter was born in August, a tiny perfect creature with Kellan's gray eyes and Elena's dark curls. They named her Grace Patricia, after Kellan's mother and the grace that had brought them together. "I can't believe she's ours," Elena whispered, holding Grace for the first time. "I can't believe we made this perfect little person." "She's going to be amazing," Kellan said, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter. Just like her mother. Parenthood was exhausting and overwhelming and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. Elena took maternity leave from the museum, and Kellan worked from home as much as possible, both of them reluctant to miss a single moment of Grace's life. When Grace was 6 months old, Elena got a call that changed everything. A small gallery space in Soho was available for lease, and the owner, an elderly woman who was retiring, had heard about Elena from Margaret. She wanted to give Elena first chance at it, at a price Elena could actually afford. "It's perfect," Elena told Kellan after she'd toured the space. "It's small but beautiful, right in the heart of the arts district. I could feature emerging artists, local creators, really make a difference." "Then do it," Kellan said. "I'm not sure I can afford it, even with the good price. And I'd have to quit my job at the museum, and we have Grace now, and it's risky." "Elena." Kellan took her hands. "You've been dreaming about this for years. The money will work out. We'll make it work. Take the leap." She did. Elena opened Dawson Gallery the following spring, and it was everything she'd hoped for. She featured young artists who couldn't get shows elsewhere, pieces that were beautiful and meaningful and affordable. The gallery didn't make a lot of money at first, but it made enough, and more importantly, it made Elena happy. Kellan would bring Grace by during the day, and Elena would take breaks to feed her and play with her. They were building the life they'd both dreamed of, full of love and creativity and purpose. On their third wedding anniversary, they went back to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Grace toddling between them, holding both their hands. They sat on the same bench where they'd had their first kiss as a married couple, and Kellan pulled Elena close. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked. "3 years ago when you knocked on my door asking for help." "Not in my wildest dreams," Elena admitted. "I thought you were just a grumpy neighbor who let me stay one night out of obligation." "I thought you were just a beautiful woman who'd be out of my life by morning," Kellan said. "I had no idea you'd become my entire world." "I love you," Elena said. "I love the life we've built together." "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Grace squealed and pointed at a butterfly, and they both laughed. Elena watched Kellan scoop up their daughter, watched him smile at her with so much love it made her chest ache, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. Her apartment flooding had seemed like a disaster at the time, but it had led her to this man, this life, this perfect family. 2 years later, they had a son, James, who had Elena's smile and Kellan's determination. Their apartment became too small for a family of 4, so they bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, one with a backyard for the kids and space for Elena's art collection and an office for Kellan. Elena's gallery became successful, not in a make-you-rich way, but in a sustainable, meaningful way. She was recognized in the art community for her eye for talent, for her commitment to emerging artists. Several of the artists she'd featured went on to major success, and they always credited Elena with giving them their start. Kellan scaled back at work, promoting talented people beneath him and trusting them to handle more of the day-to-day operations. He was still successful, still driven, but he'd learned to balance ambition with presence. He coached James's little league team and helped Grace with her homework and made sure he was home for family dinners every night. On Grace's 5th birthday, Patricia came to visit. She was older now, moving slower, but her eyes were still sharp and full of love. She watched Kellan playing with the kids in the backyard and shook her head in wonder. "I never thought I'd see him like this," she told Elena. "So happy, so settled. You gave him the family he always wanted but never thought he could have." "He gave me just as much," Elena said. "He taught me that it's okay to let people help, that love doesn't make you weak or dependent, that the right person enhances your life without diminishing who you are. You're both lucky to have found each other." "I know." Elena watched Kellan chase Grace around the yard while James laughed from his arms. "Believe me, I know." That night, after the kids were in bed and Patricia had gone to her hotel, Elena and Kellan sat on their back porch with glasses of wine. "This is nice," Elena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "This life we've made." "It's everything," Kellan agreed. "Everything I never knew I needed." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city around them. Elena thought about that night 6 years ago, standing in a flooded apartment with nowhere to go. She'd been so scared, so uncertain. She'd knocked on a stranger's door out of desperation, never imagining that the grumpy man who answered would become her husband, her partner, the father of her children. "Thank you," Elena said softly. "For what?" "For opening your door, for letting me stay, for loving me." Kellan turned to look at her, his gray eyes soft in the porch light. "I should be thanking you. You're the one who saw past the grumpy exterior to the lonely man underneath. You're the one who taught me how to actually live." "We saved each other," Elena said. "Yeah," Kellan agreed, kissing her gently. "I guess we did." Years passed, full of ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. Grace grew into a thoughtful teenager who wanted to be a writer. James became a soccer star with Kellan's competitive drive and Elena's creative soul. Elena's gallery expanded to a second location, and she published a book about emerging artists that became a standard text in art schools. Kellan finally retired at 50, saying he'd worked long enough and wanted to spend his remaining years focused on family. They took trips together, the four of them exploring the world. They went back to Paris for their 15th anniversary and told the kids the story of how Kellan had proposed. They spent summers at a beach house in the Hamptons and winters skiing in Vermont. They had game nights and movie nights and lazy Sunday mornings reading together. When Grace graduated from college, she gave a speech at her graduation party. "I want to thank my parents," she said, raising her glass, "for showing me what real love looks like. For teaching me that the best relationships are built on respect and support and genuine friendship. For being each other's biggest fans while still maintaining your own identities and dreams. You've set an impossible standard, and I love you for it." Elena cried, and Kellan held her hand tightly. "We did good," he whispered. "We did really good," Elena agreed. On their 20th anniversary, they went back to the apartment building where they'd met. It had been renovated, made into condos, and their old apartments were gone. But they stood in the hallway where Elena had first knocked on Kellan's door, and they remembered. "I was such an ass to you," Kellan said, shaking his head. "You were having a bad day. I told you there were hotels, and then you let me stay anyway." Elena wrapped her arms around him. "That's what mattered. You let me stay and you never let me go." "Never," Kellan promised. "I'm never letting you go." They kissed in that hallway, 20 years older than the scared, lonely people who'd met there, but still just as in love. More in love, maybe, deepened by years of partnership and parenting and building a life together. When they finally moved to leave, Elena took one last look at the door that had once been 4D. "Thank you," she whispered, to the apartment, to fate, to whatever had brought them together that rainy night. Kellan took her hand and they walked out together, back to their brownstone, back to their life, back to the home they'd built from a flooded apartment and a grumpy billionaire's grudging kindness. It was everything Elena had never known she wanted. Everything Kellan had stopped believing he deserved. And it had all started with a knock on a door and a man who'd been just kind enough, just lonely enough, to let her stay. The years continued to be good to them. They became grandparents when Grace had twins at 30, a boy and a girl she named after her grandmothers. Kellan was gentle with them in a way that made Elena fall in love with him all over again, patient and playful and fully present. "I'm better at this the second time around," Kellan said, holding both babies while Grace napped. "You were good the first time too," Elena assured him. "You've always been a wonderful father." James got married to a kind woman named Sophie who was a teacher, and they settled in Brooklyn just a few blocks away. Sunday dinners became a tradition, all of them gathering at Elena and Kellan's house for food and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family. Elena eventually retired from the gallery, turning it over to a young curator she'd been mentoring for years. She spent her days painting, something she'd always loved but never had time for. She was surprisingly good at it, and Kellan insisted on hanging her pieces all over their house. "I'm biased," he admitted, "but I think you're brilliant." "You've always thought I was brilliant," Elena teased, "even when I was soaking wet and begging for help, especially then. You had the courage to ask for what you needed. That's its own kind of brilliance." They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by years of choosing each other every single day. On their 40th anniversary, their family threw them a party. Grace and James gave speeches. The grandchildren performed a little play. Friends from every stage of their lives came to celebrate. 40 years, Patricia said, now in her 90s but still sharp. I knew from the moment I met you, Elena, that you were special, that you'd changed my boy's life. He changed mine just as much, Elena said. That evening, when everyone had gone home and it was just the two of them, Elena and Kellan sat in their living room. The same room where they'd kissed for the first time as a married couple, where they'd brought both their babies home from the hospital, where they'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings. If you could go back, Kellan said thoughtfully, to that night your apartment flooded, would you change anything? Elena thought about it. Not a single thing. Well, maybe I'd be less nervous when I knocked on your door. I'd be less of an ass when I opened it. You were perfect, Elena said, grumpy and reluctant and secretly kind. Exactly what I needed. Kellan pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder the way she'd done thousands of times before. I love you, Elena Driscoll. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too. You're my home, Kellan. You always have been. They sat together as the sun set. Two people who'd found each other in the chaos of a flooded apartment and a reluctant kindness. Two people who'd built a life full of love and laughter and purpose. Two people who proved that sometimes the worst days lead to the best things. If you're brave enough to knock on a stranger's door, and the stranger is kind enough to let you stay. And when Elena closed her eyes that night, safe in Kellan's arms after 40 years of marriage, she sent up a silent thank you to that broken pipe and that flooded apartment and that grumpy billionaire who'd changed her entire world by simply saying, yes, you can stay. It had been the beginning of everything. And as they drifted off to sleep together, Elena knew that their story, which had started with water and uncertainty and a desperate knock on a door, had become exactly what they'd both needed it to be. A love story. A real home. A happily ever after that they'd built together, one day at a time, for the rest of their lives.